And welcome back to another episode of Jason's Game Room, the only podcast here on YouTube that talks about everything gaming, from board games to video games to dice games to CCGs. I've even covered Pogs and miniatures on this show because why not? If it has anything in the world to do with gaming, it's going to be on this show and you're going to want to keep tuning in week after week to see what I'm on about next. Now, on today's episode, I want to talk to you about something I've largely forgotten over the years, mainly because it has not been relevant in quite some time, but it was a huge thing in the mid-90s, through to the late 90s, and into the early 2000s to a certain extent. And this would be an organization that popped up called Good Traders Against Bad Traders, also known as G.A.B. or G.A.B. Now, the idea behind it was during the CCG craze, when it got big, and then when websites and the internet started becoming prevalent in the mid to late 90s, people wanted to find ways to trade with other collectors and other players. But a lot of people had issues doing so because there were a lot of scams going on where some players would rip off other players. They'd send their cards, but they wouldn't get anything in return. And a lot of people took offense to that. I, myself included, even though I had not traded at that point in that sense. I'd only traded with people I went to school with. But I was still mad that people would get ripped off like that once hearing about it. So a group of people in the US got together and created G.A.B. And the idea was it was safe trading over the mail. You'd set up trades via email or the very early message boards or chat rooms and whatnot. And if you were trading with a member of G.A.B., it would be safe because even though you'd have to send them your cards first in the trade, you'd have no problem getting theirs because they had a code they went by and they wanted the experience to be pleasurable for everybody concerned and quite fair. Because anyone knows that even if you're trading with friends to a certain extent, especially in the early years of CCGs, there were a lot of lopsided trades because some friends always had a better collection than others and they weren't willing to give up crap for good cards. So, G.A.B. came about. They had different color-coded teams that were organized by region of North America, and I think later they expanded into Europe and other places, but it was primarily North America to start, Canada and the US, and it was a good idea for a short period of time. I even joined as a member of G.A.B. I was part of the Acid Blue team for a couple years or so, actually 3 years. But by the time we started getting towards the late 90s and closer to the year 2000, G.A.B. became a mess. And like other organizations that were initially set up to help people and to be fun, as you can imagine, a lot of people at the top got a little arrogant about the whole thing, and the ranks of people running G.A.B. got extremely bloated. You saw more and more second-in-commands and commanders and leaders and people trying to issue orders and saying, no, we have to do this, we have to change this, we have to add this, people have to do that. And to use a phrase loosely that a friend of mine I used to work with would say, there were more chiefs than Indians running around. And what happened was by the early 2000s, G.A.B. started having problems because there was a lot of corruption going on at G.A.B. There were members that were ripping off other people just because they were part of G.A.B. And because there was no video conferencing or anything like that at the time, you would be joining G.A.B. as a member on an honor system saying that you wouldn't go past the G.A.B. code of conduct in terms of your trades. But a lot of people did. A lot of the early color-coded G.A.B. teams were shut down in short order, including the one I was in, which was called Acid Blue, because there was a ton of corruption in our own team. The guys in charge of the team were continually ripping off other players, and when the word got out about that, it cast a very bad mark on G.A.B. because the whole point of G.A.B. was to have fair and even trades to make sure nobody got ripped off. But, of course, as a wise man once said, absolute power corrupts, absolutely. And whenever you have an organization by people that have egos, who even when their egos get damaged, they still find ways to just go over the top. And, of course, human greed. You can never count out human greed. And this all coagulated into a giant mess. And G.A.B. started dumping a lot of people, bringing in new people, trying to get new members and new recruitment and coming out with new color-coded teams and new regions because the corruption was so widespread. There was not a team or a region in G.A.B. at one point that was not corrupt or wasn't stealing cards or wasn't involved in something. And it's a shame that it had to go that way because G.A.B. was a great idea at the start. I thought it was an excellent idea when I heard about it and found it, and I wanted to join and help people in my own region to network and set up trades and do that. But human greed knows no bounds, and when some people have a bit of an ego and couple that with the greed, and they have this illusionary power that there's something even though they are not, problems arise and things will go awry as they usually do, and they did. And in the early 2000s to the mid 2000s, G.A.B. was already a dead issue. They were starting now to move their web hosting from website to website because they couldn't get traction anymore. If you look them up today, their website is still active, but it's been moved another handful of times, and they have not updated anything on that site since 2012. In my personal opinion, and based on everything I've seen, G.A.B. was pretty much done around 2005, 2006, mainly because internet technology had come a long way since then. We went through news groups and message boards, and Skype happened, and other video conferencing, and people were finding better ways to track packages that were mailed. And there were more ways to catch people scamming other people, so you can only get away with certain things for so long. But I don't know. It's one of those things when you look back on it that maybe it shouldn't have been started. Like, it had its time and a place until it went off the deep end. Just like other organizations, you've heard me talk about the Continuing Committee on here, how they were good for the first 7 months, and power corrupted them, and look what happened to that. You have a lot of angry people now, but in terms of G.A.B., it's too bad it had to go that way. A lot of people were very enthused about it at the very beginning, and it had potential to become something even better. And in my opinion as well, if they would have expanded the group to the point where maybe they had people that would show up at the card conventions and the tournaments and explain more of G.A.B. and maybe make it into something better than it was at the time. Because when the ranks swelled, more and more people and all those teams, you can't keep track of hundreds, almost 1,000 people over a continent and expect everybody to play by the rules. And then when someone brings up the horrendous corruption going on and people getting cheated out of trades, you don't just look the other way and go, oh, that can't happen to us. We're G.A.B. We're good traders against bad traders. We stand for everything that is holy and right. No, no, no. And when this started coming out about the scams and the corruption, that was the main problem with G.A.B. at the time, was that they denied it, saying that, no, this doesn't happen to us because we're G.A.B. Well, it did happen, and even former members like myself spoke out about it and said, look, the corruption was there almost since the beginning because you let everything expand too quickly without having any checks or anyone making sure what was going on. Having an organization that's based completely off one website is fine and dandy, but if you don't have someone occasionally checking on this and maybe going around and networking in person with other members, it's doomed to fail, unfortunately. That's my thoughts on that for today. I don't want to go on about it too much because there's only so much I can talk about. Like I said, it was a great idea. G.A.B. was good for the first 2 or 3 years, especially when I was in it. It was decent, and it just went downhill from there. It is what it is. Power corrupts, greed kills. Everybody has a price. Yeah, I just quoted Ted DiBiase, the $1 Million Man, but it's true. Especially if you're involved in a trade and you see a whole bunch of rare cards and you don't want to give up yours. You know, it was too easy for people not to send the cards and then jump off the bandwagon. So there you go. That's all for today. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. I'll have more content on the next show. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe. If you have any additional questions about G.A.B., I'll be happy to answer them in the comment section below. Have a great day, and don't forget, the most important thing I can ever tell you is to game on!